The second presenter for this panel on connectivity, displacement and everyday life is Dr. Raelene Wilding from La Trobe University, and the title of her presentation is Social Media and the Refugee Experience, Young People Negotiating Displacement in an Age of Connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Monika. You might have picked up that my title is different to the one that's attached to my name in the program. I've got some good news and some bad news. The bad news is I'm not presenting this paper or this title. The good news is Joe will be. So you have that to come ahead. But in the meantime, what I'll be talking about is a project that I've been doing with Professor Sandra Gifford at Swinburne University and a number of very talented research assistants and industry partners, which we call Homelands. Now, Homelands is a project that was supported by an ARC linkage grant. It ran from about 2008, when we did a pilot before the linkage funding, until about 2013. And since then, we've still been trying to think through all of the issues that have been coming up out of the data we collected, which is why I feel so grateful to have this opportunity today to rehearse a set of ideas I've been thinking about in relation to some of the data. The project was actually comprised of two programs that were designed by our industry partners. The first program, which ran for a year in about 2009-2010, was what we called a community development program. And so in that sense, it emphasised participation of young people. And what we were trying to do with this and with the other program was to answer one central question, which asked whether young people from refugee backgrounds living in Melbourne might have a more positive settlement experience if they were supported in connecting with their peers in the countries that they had left behind and that their parents had left behind. So the homelands that's part of the title of our project referred to both the homes in which they had lived prior to coming to Australia, their home in Australia, but also the homes that their families imagined as being significant to their lives. So in the first program, we had about 34 Karen youth who were participating in Melbourne. They were aged between about 16 and 25, mostly between the ages of 16 and 18. They had mostly arrived within the past 5 years before participating in the program, and they had come from refugee camps on the Thai-Burma border. And I'm using the name Burma because that's the term that the young people used. They didn't talk about Myanmar. They had arrived on humanitarian visas, and they were primarily identifying themselves as Christian. And they were recruited to the program through a peer facilitator in one of our industry partner organisations, a multicultural youth organisation. Collaborating with them were 14 Karen youth living in and around a refugee camp on the Thai-Burma border, who were communicating with them through Skype and through the occasional email. The emails were actually sent between the facilitators on the border and the facilitators in Melbourne. Our second part of the project, what we began to call Homeland V2, was run subsequent to the first part. And in this, again, approximately a one-year program, rather than emphasising participation and trying to get as many young people involved as possible, what we emphasised here was cultural development. And what we meant by this was giving the young people an opportunity to develop multimedia skills that would enable them to have some sort of public impact, that they could produce something that would have some sort of arts or cultural impact. So for this project, for this program, we had a much smaller cohort, about 10 participants. They were slightly older, aged between 18 to 25, rather than the first cohort who were primarily attending high school. Some of them were employed and some in university, but most were high school students. In this case, we had primarily university students. They were all already involved in local community organisations and were very active as local community leaders. This was how they became identified to us, through their ethnic organisations. And they identified, in contrast to the first program, they identified 5 people living in Pakistan and Afghanistan who they would like to collaborate with, who they felt would also be interested in producing multimedia products for exchange across national borders. So in the first program, Homeland V2, we had young people producing digital stories and, on their own initiative, using this opportunity to create music videos. They composed a whole lot of songs and they produced videos to go along with these, which they then posted online or packaged into a DVD. In the second version, what we had was young people producing photo essays. They were producing microdocs addressing issues that they considered to be of interest, and projections as something slightly different. And in both cases, we had exhibitions around the city of Melbourne that helped them to display their work, and that was particularly crucial to their sense of belonging in Australia. But that's not what I want to reflect on today. What I want to do today is to reflect instead on the diverse uses of social media that we observed during the project. Not necessarily something we were provoking in the project, not necessarily something that we were asking them to do, but rather responding to their desire to use social media and trying to monitor the different ways in which they were using it. Now, I'm positioning our analysis in an awareness that around the time of the Homelands project, the media landscape itself was undergoing rapid change, and at our regular project meetings, we ended up having to have them fortnightly because there was always some issue that we were facing in terms of the technology we'd introduced to the young people or that they'd introduced to us suddenly becoming obsolete or suddenly becoming unavailable or having to deal with a whole range of different desires and issues of access. The young people themselves were also being exposed to multiple influences outside of the project that were shaping their own participation. We have to remember that as young people and as young people entering into a new country, they themselves were undergoing a lot of changes and responding to the world around them in a range of different ways. Some of the very simple ways in which this happened were a shift for the Karen participants from using high five at the start of the project to rapidly abandoning that and instead moving on to Facebook without necessarily letting our facilitators know, so that they sort of lost track of them and then had to re-find them through Facebook. So some really dynamic engagements with different technologies. And they're all part of the production of a social media landscape that is still being theorised and conceptualised, and this is something that I want to return to later. In the meantime, what I want to do is share with you 3 forms of social media engagement that have emerged through this project, during this project, in order to reflect on what they might tell us about young people from refugee backgrounds and the role of social media in their lives during that period of time. And I've labelled these 3 forms, for the moment, co-presence and intimacy, refugee identities, and ethnic youth identities and belonging. Okay, so beginning with co-presence and the production of intimacy. The images that you see here are a cartoon version of images that have been produced by participants in Homelands V2. So what I've tried to do here is take the actual photographic images and just anonymise them a bit. I'm really struggling with this sense of how do you maintain anonymous identities and yet display some of the activities that people were doing. So this is my current strategy. If anyone has better ideas, please let me know. What we lose in this is some of the quality of the work. I mean, these are really pristine images, pristine photographic images. What you get instead is an impression of it, so please use your imaginations, fill in the sharp lines and the great colour and so on, but at least this gives you a sense of what it was they were doing. Now, this image up to the top left features one of our participants framed on the wall of a sparsely furnished modern room, somewhat like a hotel room. And another 2 frames on the walls position a group shot of members of his extended family, and next to him an image of his sister. It was during our fieldwork beyond the program with the Karen youth that we discovered this practice of reposing existing digital and sometimes scanned photographs to create new images of the family. And I was really interested to hear Brenda speak earlier of that New York photographic artist who's doing the same sort of work. These are obviously much less sophisticated versions of that, but certainly a very common practice amongst this particular group. Sometimes the new image was a representation of an extended kinship network that had been dispersed across multiple locations during the resettlement experience. as is the case with this image. The large group photo is the last one that was taken of this particular family before some of the members were resettled in North America, some in Australia, and some remaining on the Thai-Burma border. In other cases, the reposing of images served to position geographically and physically co-present kin within a new context, and that's what's happening in the image to the bottom right here, where you have our youth participant who recently had a baby, who chose to place a photograph of himself and his new baby on the wall of some sort of anonymous corridor, or perhaps it's an art gallery, I can't quite tell. It seems that one of the men pointing at the picture is actually Arnold Schwarzenegger, so there's this really interesting sense of being looked at and being admired by people unknown to them.